everyone, coming to you again with another Disney vs. Original Work review, and today we are going to talk about Winnie the Pooh. Yes, Winnie the Pooh. I have skipped the Aristocrats because it's technically based on a story, but I could not find that story for some reason. I don't know if it was intended to be a story that was made up by the Disney community. It did mention two names, but again, it didn't say like a book by this person's name and then offer like a link to the book or anything. So all I know is that it is sort of based upon like a story, but I think it was by two people, and I'm guessing that those people were technically part of the maybe Disney community. So I could not find any other original source material based on it. So I decided that it would be best if I just skipped that one. And then the next one that came after the Aristocrats was Robin Hood. Now with Robin Hood, it's actually based upon the legends of Robin Hood, and not necessarily a coherent kind of a story. It just follows these different kinds of quote-unquote legends. So it's not really based upon so much of the source material as it is sort of a supposed legend of Robin Hood. So and instead of like maybe the book, so I've decided that it would be best to focus on something that is actually based upon a work or works. And the next one that came after Robin Hood was Winnie the Pooh. And since this is the Many Adventures or Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, it's actually based on various source materials, in sort of the form of collections of Winnie the Pooh books. And these Winnie the Pooh books are by a man named A.A. Milne, and basically the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh focuses on and is divided into sort of three sections. You've got Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree as one story. You've got Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day is the second story. And then you have Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2 as the third story, as far as Disney was going into separating these various stories and then creating one movie out of these three separate kinds of stories. They were intentionally just featurettes, but then they just decided to put them all together and sort of have it just be one film. And so that's why it is counted as sort of a Disney film. So I figured, why not focus on those? And these particular segments are all based upon A.A. Milne's works, but with some fair differences as well as similarities. So I'm going to sort of go in order here and discuss the first segment, which is, like I said, Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree. And what the Disney version tries to base itself on is on the first two chapters of the Winnie the Pooh book. There are different books that A.A. Milne wrote on Winnie the Pooh, and Winnie the Pooh just happened to be one of them. But it just focuses the Disney version on just two of those chapters. So I figured, why not talk about these two chapters and as to how they're different and the same to sort of the Disney work and what they decided to pull from it. In the original work, it sort of starts out with Winnie the Pooh being introduced by Christopher Robin sort of bringing him down the stairs, so to speak. I don't know if you've seen this, but if you've seen kids like maybe carrying a stuffed animal or something, they'll sometimes maybe drag it, and Winnie the Pooh is just really introduced by Christopher Robin sort of just dragging him down the stairs. and then sort of having him kind of come to life, and we sort of get a sort of introduction to him as a character. But in the Disney version, we'll see how it's introduced through going through Christopher Robin's room, and then suddenly we'll see how the book of Winnie the Pooh opens, and then there's all these pictures, and then we see Christopher Robin's swing moving, and then we see like the animation and things come to life, and then we sort of get introduced to all the characters and all of sort of this 100-acre wood area and Winnie the Pooh through song. Then in the original work, it basically starts to set up Winnie the Pooh being again at the same place like as it's explained in the Disney version, under the Mr. Sanders golden letters. And then it kind of comes up with the idea of Winnie the Pooh just walking in the woods, and then he sees a oak tree, and then he hears all these bees around him, and then he just starts to become curious and thinks, oh, that there's honey there. And it is emphasized in the original work that he does really like honey, and so he tries to climb the tree. But in the Disney version, Pooh is sort of introduced in his home, and he does like these various exercises, and you kind of see how he likes honey and such. And then a bee comes through his window, and then Pooh recognizes this bee, and he realizes that he's out of honey because, as you'll see, he's trying to figure out how he can get some honey from his home, and then he realizes, oh, I'm out. And then the bee comes in, and then he sort of follows that bee out of his window, and then he sees it climb. It goes to where this tree is, like right by his house. And so that's where he decides, okay, I'm gonna go and climb this tree now, in the Disney version. So basically the original work then continues with, as he's climbing this tree, he begins to sort of sing. And he sort of sings this, and I thought this was a little interestingly funny and sort of like this cute little innocent kind of song. He basically sings, "Isn't it funny how a bear likes honey? Buzz, buzz, buzz. I wonder why he does." Then as he climbs further up the tree, he sings another song. It's a very funny thought that if bears were bees, they'd build their nests in the bottom of trees. And that being so, the bees were bears, they wouldn't have to climb up all these stairs. And basically, after he's sort of done singing this, he then falls down the tree. Because he falls off the tree as he's on like a branch, and then the branch snaps, and then he falls. In the Disney work, it plays that fairly similarly, and instead he sings something sort of completely different. At first he starts to hum, and then he sort of kind of makes up a song as he's kind of humming. He goes like, hum-da-dee-dum, hum-da-dee-da, I'm so rumbly in my tumbly, time to munch an early lunch, and hum-dee-dum-dum-dum. Oh, and I would climb this tree if a Pooh flew like a bee, but I wouldn't be a bear then, and so I guess I wouldn't care then. There's some honey, and I am Pooh Bear, and so I do care. And so I'll climb there. I'm so rumbly in my tumbly, time for something, for something. And basically that's kind of what he sings in the Disney version. So I thought it was interesting how Disney kind of decided to change what he says. And even though I think the original work maybe can be described as a little bit more intellectual than Pooh is sort of expressed through the Disney work. And I think we'll sort of see this as I'm explaining a lot of what's going on within this plot, because Winnie the Pooh is fairly plot-driven, and sort of character-likely driven, but Pooh, I think, in the Disney version is intended to be a little bit more naive and more innocent. I think, though, the original Pooh Bear in the original work is innocent and naive to a certain extent, but I think he's a little bit more intellectual. And I think through what I've explained through these various songs that they sing, I think it shows their level of intelligence into how Pooh in the Disney version is so focused on honey, but yet the original work kind of plays into this idea of how he's thinking about the bees and what it would be really like to be a bee then. But in the Disney work, it kind of focuses on these parts where Pooh does talk about bees, but then he kind of shrugs it off and says, I guess I wouldn't really care. I think it sort of plays into that idea that Pooh is a little bit more, I guess maybe more of a sort of thinker in the original work, and in the Disney work he's just kind of played up more innocently and charmingly naive. And I think that's really the charm of what the Disney version was going for, because I think all they were trying to do was make Pooh charming, and in doing so by making him somewhat more naive maybe than the original work sort of presents him out to be. Then also in the Disney work he falls down the tree, but it sort of plays also into the idea of how Christopher Robin comes into the picture a little bit differently in both versions. In the original work, Pooh thinks of going to Christopher Robin and to ask for help when he falls out of the tree. Christopher Robin lived on another part of the wood behind a green door. And I thought that was interesting. Disney never mentions, I've never heard Disney once mention, from all the things that I've watched of Winnie the Pooh, I've never heard them mention a green door. And basically in the original work, he asks for a balloon that Christopher has, and he happens to have a green one and a blue one because Piglet had a party recently, and that's where Christopher Robin got the balloon. And then Pooh rolls in the mud and uses the blue balloon to look like a black cloud in the blue sky. So we get this whole sort of famous scene where it plays sort of similarly out to the Disney version, where he's trying to pretend to be something. And I think that's a really cute kind of creative idea with the balloon and how the balloon is blue. In the Disney version, it's fairly similar in only the fact that Christopher Robin is only said to have one balloon, and this balloon's like attached to a bike at one point in the beginning. And also we get sort of an introduction to the other characters as well. The original work just focuses in this story in particular on Pooh and Christopher Robin. But in the Disney work we get to see, I believe it's Eeyore, Kangaroo, and Owl introduced. And Christopher Robin is actually repairing Eeyore's tail. But in the original work we don't see any of that happening. Winnie the Pooh just happens to go to Christopher Robin and ask him for help, and then he gives him help. But for the most part, that's really the only difference. I mean, still in the Disney version you got Pooh rolling in the mud and thinking that he'll just be a black cloud and that he'll use the blue balloon as a means of pretending to be this black cloud. And also, it's emphasized in the Disney version that Pooh actually does take some honey and eats it, except he spits the bees out because as he's getting this honey, there's some bees attached to the honey, and then when he gulps it down, you'll see how he tries to spit them out like like seeds or something. He'll just go like and just spit them all out. But in the original work, we don't see any of that happening. But we see later on that the bees do get more aggressive in both versions. And basically, in the original version, Pooh tells Christopher Robin, since Pooh is like dripping with mud, he thinks he can somehow fool the bees into thinking that he is a cloud and that he's not like a threat to them. And so he tells Christopher Robin to get his umbrella and say, like, tut tut, it looks like rain. And you sort of get the same thing in the Disney version as well, where he's like, tut tut, it looks like rain. Tut tut, it looks like rain. And basically you get another song that Pooh sings in the original work that we don't get in the Disney version, but he says, like, how sweet it is to be a cloud floating in the blue. Every little cloud always sings aloud. How sweet to be a cloud floating in the blue. It makes it very proud to be a little cloud. And also how we get, however, we do get a point where the original work kind of drifts away with everything that's really going on plot-wise compared to the Disney version, when the bees get too aggressive. And and I think Pooh's intelligence is fairly emphasized as well in the original work, when he says at one point, we need to find the queen bee. Which one's the queen bee? This is the one that, you know, we should look for. And, like, he kind of asked Christopher Robin, can you tell which one's the queen bee? None of that is emphasized really in the Disney version, that Pooh is really kind of really thinking about these things. It seems like in the Disney work, Pooh kind of just goes along with whatever's happening, and if something is really not going well, he kind of panics and just asks for help. But I think Pooh in the original works at least tries to ask kind of questions and tries to figure out a way around it. But I think that's also something to note. But basically in the original work, how it works is that the bees get too aggressive, and then Christopher Robin then takes out his shotgun that he has. And basically Pooh tells him to, you know, shoot the balloon so he can come down. Because again, he's trying to go up with the tree with the balloon. That's the whole idea. But once Pooh is down in the original work, once Christopher Robin shoots him down, and he's coming down, and Pooh is like holding the balloon with like both of his hands, and once he comes down on the ground, his hands stay up there for almost more than a week, because I guess he was just so long up there that he just got so used to having his hands up in the air like that, that he just stayed there solid. And then as he stays there solid, a fly comes onto his nose, and he tries to, and he can't just like swish the fly away, because again he has his hands are like staying there frozen solid, and basically he just goes poof to get the fly off him. And that is apparently how the original work tries to emphasize Pooh's name. They say, I think this is where Pooh got his name, and that's how people know that he's Pooh, it's because he can poo a fly. That's really how the original work plays out. The Disney work plays out a little bit differently in the fact that Christopher Robin doesn't shoot the balloon. What happens is that the bees just get too aggressive, and then the balloon loses its string that it's on, and then in doing so it just flies in the air as the bees are chasing Pooh, and he's like holding the balloon as it's like deflating, because again the string is the only thing that's holding the balloon together so it can have air inside of it. And then Christopher Robin catches Pooh as he is falling, and then they start to chase them, but Christopher Robin manages to have his umbrella there and go into a puddle, and then he and Pooh sort of hide underneath Christopher Robin's umbrella, and then the bees just kind of swarm away and then don't recognize them being underneath the umbrella in sort of this muddy puddle. And that's basically how the first story ends. But again, this is something that's based on 2 chapters, and Disney tries to kind of combine these 2 chapters in an interesting way, whereas I think the original work really tries to emphasize that they're 2 chapters and 2 different stories. And you'll kind of see this as I'm trying to explain it. But basically, in the second chapter, we see Pooh sort of doing exercises, and these exercises are emphasized in the Disney work in the first chapter, but the original work focuses on them in the second chapter. And all it mentions is that he is doing exercises, and he's doing like this humming while he's exercising, and then when he's later out in the woods, which is really technically how the original work starts, that's where they reference back to the exercising, is that he hums these exercises and then he hums outside because he was able to hum through his exercising. Basically he is wandering through like the forest, and then he comes across Rabbit's hole, and we see Rabbit's character sort of being introduced. He pokes through the hole and calls for Rabbit, and you'll see this similarly in the Disney version, where he is walking through the forest, but again you'll notice that from the Disney version, Pooh didn't get his honey, and so now it focuses on the idea in the Disney version that he's determined to get his honey, and he thinks that Rabbit can provide him with that now that he sees the rabbit hole and such. So that's how the Disney version tries to connect itself, whereas in the original work there's no really intentionally direct relation to the 2 chapters really together to create one story, whereas Disney tries to emphasize this connection sort of. But after Rabbit kind of unconvincingly tries to say that there's nobody there, even though he's talking, and Pooh kind of still being somewhat reasonable in both versions is kind of going, well, there has to be somebody there. And then sort of Rabbit finally just kind of reveals himself and is like, okay, I guess I need to let Pooh in here. And so Rabbit finally lets him in the original work, same as the Disney work, and gives Pooh some food, and then he eats, and then Pooh eats and eats and eats, like in the Disney work. And he eats to the point where when he tries to get out of Rabbit's hole or front door, he can't, because he's too fat, because he ate too much. And then as Rabbit is seeing this, he decides, okay, I need to go out the back way and I need to get Christopher Robin. So basically that's the same thing in the Disney work. And then Christopher Robin comes back, and then he tries to pull him out. But we'll see in the Disney work how some other characters come into play. And I will explain that as I'll explain the Disney work. But basically in the original work, Christopher Robin says, yeah, there's no use, we're not going to be able to get you out, Pooh. You're just going to have to stand there, or, well, lay there, until you get thinner. And so, basically it's sort of emphasized too in the original work that Christopher Robin comes and kind of entertains Pooh, as he's kind of being stuck there in this hole, like half his body's out of the hole and half his body's in the hole. And it's kind of emphasized that he's kind of being entertained by Christopher Robin through like reading and such. And in the original work as well, Rabbit sort of uses Pooh's lower body as a means of putting, like, as a towel holder. Like, he uses his legs as kind of like a towel holder because his legs are sort of bent, and he uses him as for that. But in the Disney work, he kind of uses him for something different, and I'll kind of explain that. But once the time comes eventually that Pooh is thin enough, Christopher Robin and Rabbit and his relations, again we'll see how this is different in the Disney version, tried to get Pooh out by pulling him. And then after thanking everyone, Pooh went on his way again, humming. And that's really the end of the original work. Disney work's somewhat different. Basically, the main difference that we're seeing in the Disney work is that as Rabbit is trying to go to Christopher Robin and Pooh's left on his own, we see Owl come into the picture and be introduced. And Owl sees that Pooh is stuck, and then a gopher appears and says that he can help. And then he sort of leaves in his hole. And again, Disney, I think, kind of does this for sort of comedic stuff. You'll kind of see how the gopher's kind of funny in a way, and you'll see how Owl's kind of funny, and they're supposed to be sort of more done for entertainment purposes. And then Christopher Robin then comes with Rabbit, and they can't pull him out. And then you'll see as Christopher Robin's coming back, you'll see suddenly Eeyore just show up, and then basically it's the same thing where they say, you know, Christopher Robin's like, we're gonna have to wait until you get thinner. That's the only way, Pooh. And then you'll see how Rabbit decorates him, but he decorates him in like a different way. He puts like a wooden board on Pooh's like legs, and then like he draws on his whole like backside like a face, and then he tries to put like branches on him to make him look like sort of like a mantelpiece. Or he'll put like a cloth on him, and then he'll put like flowers on top of the little board that he has. Very different than just using him as a towel holder. But you'll see how, as they're waiting for Pooh to get thinner, the gopher shows up in the evening with his food, and then Pooh asks for some honey. And then Rabbit's like, oh no, I can't have him start eating because then he won't come out. Then he won't get out because Pooh will just stay fat and he won't get thinner. So he kind of tells Gopher, no, you can't feed him food. And then basically the Gopher kind of goes, all right, I'm not touching him anymore, you know, I'm just gonna stay out of this. And then basically once the time comes, all the main characters, and this is like Eeyore, you'll see Christopher Robin, and you'll see Rabbit, and you'll see, I think probably almost the major cast, except maybe Tigger. I don't think Tigger comes into play here, but I think for the most part, I think Kanga and Roo come, and they help out, as well as Eeyore, I believe. And basically they just pull him out. It's not like Rabbit and his like relations. It's really the main characters. And once they pull him out with such force that Pooh just skyrockets, and he lands into another hole, which is actually a hole of a tree. And this hole of a tree is like a beehive. And in that hole of a tree and this beehive there is honey. And that's basically how that story ends. With him, instead of like thanking people and then just going on his merry way, he gets something that he initially wanted, which is what I initially explained with the Disney version, which is honey. And you'll kind of see how, you know, they're like, what's he doing up there? And, you know, they kind of don't realize, like, he's happy now because now he has honey and he can eat and stuff. Because he was deprived for so many days because he just got too fat. But basically that's really the first segment of these adventures of Winnie the Pooh, and how they're sort of similar yet different to the Disney work. But the next segment, the Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day, is actually fairly complicated in its construction because, according to my research, it says that it is based on 3 A.A. Milne stories. In which Tigger comes to the forest and has breakfast, which is chapter 2 of The House at Pooh's Corner, which is another book that A.A. Milne wrote about Winnie the Pooh. It's also based on In Which Piglet Does a Very Grand Thing, which is chapter 8 of The House at Pooh's Corner. And In Which Piglet is Entirely Surrounded by Water, which is chapter 9 of Winnie the Pooh. And also there are elements within the Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day that are from In Which Piglet Meets a Heffalump, which is chapter 5 of Winnie the Pooh, Pooh's Nightmare. And we'll kind of see how Pooh's Nightmare sort of plays into here, and I'll kind of explain maybe a little bit of sort of the similarities and what kind of Disney pulled from that. But basically, the Disney work actually starts out with I think within a different order as to what I've explained as far as the context. But basically the content of what I'm going to explain is fairly the same. But I'll make sure once all the content is explained that I'll make sure that I'll explain the exact order as that these events happen. But basically in the original work of the chapter 2 of The House of Pooh's Corner, the chapter in which Tigger comes to the forest and has breakfast, sort of what ends up resulting is that Pooh wakes up in the middle of the night and suddenly hears a strange noise. He sees that it's Tigger, but he's never seen him before. He wakes up in the morning and sees Tigger looking in the mirror, thinking that it's another Tigger looking back at him. Has breakfast with Pooh and discovers that he doesn't like honey. Then he and Pooh go to Piglet's house. Piglet offers Tigger acorns, but Tigger doesn't like them. So they go and look for thistles and stumble across Eeyore. Tigger does not like thistles. Pooh thinks of a poem as they head to Kanga's house for breakfast. It goes like this: what should we do about poor little Tigger? If he ever eats nothing, he'll never get bigger. He doesn't like honey, acorns, and thistles, because of the taste and because of the bristles. And all the good things which an animal likes have the wrong sort of swallow, or too many spikes. But whatever his weight in pounds, shillings, or in ounces, he always seems bigger because of his bounces. And again, we sort of get this emphasis of Tigger liking to bounce, and as we're introduced to these other characters like Piglet and Tigger, you'll kind of see how they're fairly similar in the Disney work as well as from what the original work and what I'm explaining. Tigger is very like hyper and hyperactive and bouncy, and Piglet is a little bit more reserved and quiet and small. It is emphasized in that case as that to be the case. And as far as Rabbit is concerned, from what I've explained from the other segment, the first segment, Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree, Rabbit is fairly the same, but I think he does have a little bit more of a personality in the Disney version rather than the original work. I think it's really emphasized in the Disney work that Rabbit is a very practical type-esque person. I think it might be emphasized more if I've read more stories about A.A. Milne's work, but from what I could read, I felt that like from what I've explained from a story standpoint, I felt like Rabbit had at least a little more of a interesting personality, and I think that was allowed to shine through some of the scenes that we don't see in the original work, like him telling the gopher, don't feed him, So again, I think that's just something important to note before I continue on. And basically, after Pooh displays this poem in the original work, it goes on to say that as they walk, they come across Christopher Robin and they talk for a while, and then they come across Kanga's house, and then Tigger tries everything, but he doesn't like it. However, once he comes across the extract of malt, this medicine that Roo has to take, even though Roo does not like this medicine, it turns out that Tigger likes it. And then he stays at Kanga's house ever since for food, because he'll always know that he'll get that medicine that he needs, because it's the only thing that he likes. And it's kind of funny how you'll see how Tigger throughout the original work as well as the Disney work, he says like, Tigger's like this, Tigger's like that. But then later on you discover that Tigger doesn't actually like it. So it's also, I think, playing in with that kind of concept as to, kind of how certain things kind of contradict in a way through Tigger's mindset. But basically that's how really the second chapter of the original work plays out. In the other chapter, the chapter, I believe it is 8, in which Piglet does a very grand thing, we see that Piglet Pooh decides, is contemplating in the beginning of the chapter what he should do with his day and who he should go see. And he realizes that it's a Thursday, and he decides, Piglet and Pooh are contemplating what they should do, and he decides that, and they both decide that they should go wish everybody a happy Thursday. And as they go do this, the wind is very strong that day, and again, this is where we get sort of the blustery day. And then they go, it's funny because in the original work they actually go to Pooh's house to like say happy Thursday, even though Pooh is technically going with Piglet to like his house to wish himself a happy Thursday, which is fairly odd, but somehow fairly funny and sort of innocent, in an innocent sort of way. But basically they go from Pooh's house to Kanga's house to lunch, then to Rabbit's. Rabbit isn't terribly impressed with their Thursday greeting because he is such an important animal. It's not really explained. Then they go to Christopher Robin's house and have tea. Then they go to Eeyore's where they have a convo, then leave. They arrive at Owl's house and the wind causes it to be damaged. And you'll see how it actually, Owl's house actually gets tilted. And they can't get out, so Pooh comes up with an idea. They should tie Piglet to a piece of string, and then Owl could fly up to the letterbox holding the piece of string in his beak, and then he could push the string through the wire and then bring it down to the floor. And then both Owl and Pooh would pull hard on the string on one end, and Piglet would rise up to the ceiling of the other end. So I guess the whole point is for Piglet to get help, and in doing so, because they're sort of trapped within this house, because Owl there's something that's blocking sort of an exit for them. And so the whole idea is just to get Piglet out because he is the smallest. And so it's all trying to get him out of that letterbox, pretty much. And basically, Piglet is able to do that, and then and that's basically how it really ends for this segment as far as the original work is concerned. So I think it's trying to emphasize the point into how Piglet is fairly small, but he still is able to make a big impact by being so small and being able to be useful for the group and to helping solve whatever problems they come across. And then the third chapter, or the third chapter that is emphasized and based on in the Disney work, is in actually another book, which is Winnie the Pooh, instead of the house on Pooh's Corner, which is called In Which Piglet is Entirely Surrounded by Water. And basically, Piglet is in his house where the rain is pouring, and he decides to write a message in a bottle for help. Meanwhile, Pooh dreams he was at the East Pole, and it was very cold pole with the coldest sort of snow and ice all over it. He had found a beehive to sleep in, but there wasn't room for his legs, so he had left them outside. And wild woozles such that inhabit the East Pole came and nibbled at the fur off his legs to make nests for their young. And the more they nibbled, the colder his legs got, until suddenly he woke up with an ow, and there he was, sitting in his chair with his feet in water, and water all around him. And you'll kind of see how in the Disney work there is a clearly different dream going on. But this Woozle character is sort of emphasized, but in a fairly different way. But basically, it continues with Pooh going outside on a branch of his house with honey pots, and again, you'll kind of see this in the Disney version as well. And then Pooh says that he could use, so after that, it gets to the point where Pooh suddenly starts running out of honey, and then he sees a bottle, and then he thinks it's honey, and then he grabs it, and then it actually turns out to be Piglet's note, and then he can't read it, so he makes a sort of boat for himself, which he calls the Floating Bear, which is actually a pots of honey. He makes sort of a flotation device, and then basically Pooh and Christopher Robin use the umbrella then to save Piglet, because once Christopher Robin opens the letter and reads that Piglet needs help, they sort of go out and save him. That's kind of how the original work sort of ends itself, with that chapter of Piglet being saved. Disney version, somewhat thoroughly different. And it starts out differently too. Basically, in the Disney version, Pooh goes out on a windy day, and Piglet is blown away by the wind. Pooh wishes the other characters that he encounters a happy Wednesday, because the gopher tells him that it's Wednesday. And you'll kind of see how they use a day of the week, but instead of Thursday, it's Wednesday in the Disney version. They stop into Owl's house for shelter. And okay, this is where we get actually the chapter of 8 of the house on Pooh's Corner, in which Piglet does a very grand thing. This is where we get this actually happening first in the Disney version. And basically, house tips over and falls because of the wind, and Christopher Robin comes to help. But it's decided sort of that his house is damaged, but Pooh and Piglet and everybody can get out of the house. Like, that's not an issue. That does not come up in the Disney version. There's no point where Piglet has to, stand up and do something. They just get out. And then Christopher Robin decides, okay, we need to find a new house for Al, and Eeyore goes out and tries to find a house, and you'll sort of see him trying to do this as the Disney work goes on. But after this all happens, the story switches to Pooh at night, where Tigger bursts into Pooh's house. And this is again where we get the chapter 2 of the house at Pooh's Corner. And basically, he hears a noise, and then Tigger bursts into the house. Tigger gets freaked out by his reflection and discovers that he doesn't like honey. Again, similar to the original work, except in the original work, Tigger kind of stays overnight, and it's not until morning that Tigger realizes he doesn't like honey or any of those things. And actually, Tigger is the one to tell Pooh about heffalumps and woozles, and the fact that they steal honey. In the original work, heffalumps and woozles are played out in a different way. They're sort of revealed to Pooh by Christopher Robin in the particular chapter that isn't focused really on in the Disney work, but it is mentioned that they do pull elements from this chapter, and again, this chapter is chapter 5 of Winnie the Pooh. And basically, Pooh has a dream about them, and I'll sort of explain this as this happens, but then Tigger leaves. Actually, instead of staying the night, he tells Pooh about heffalumps and woozles, and then his character kind of just decides, well, gotta go now, bye-bye, and he leaves. And then Pooh has this nightmare of heffalumps and woozles, and this nightmare is somewhat pulled from elements of that chapter 5 tale, because Pooh does fall asleep and he does dream about heffalumps and woozles, but in a sort of a different way, in that I believe it's just, actually I think it's just heffalumps that are actually focused on in chapter 5, not really necessarily woozles and them being together, but you'll see how the heffalumps are kind of like emphasized to be like these elephants, and you'll kind of see how in the Disney work that's emphasized, and it's kind of emphasized in Pooh's nightmare that they steal his honey, and in the original work as well as in the Disney work as well. But you'll see at one point where Pooh is dreaming actually in the original work, and they're kind of, I think they're chasing Piglet at one point, but that doesn't happen in Pooh's dream in the Disney work. So again, it's just these Disney pulling these various elements that are somewhat similar and then not deciding to take other ones. But basically, when Pooh wakes up in the Disney version, it's raining, and then he goes and then it goes to Piglet's house, where Piglet is writing the message, and then Pooh floats down the water after putting his honey pots on the branch. Again, the same thing, and he floats down with the honey pot, and then everyone is gathering at Christopher Robin's place, while Eeyore is looking for a new house for Al, and he's kind of looking, Eeyore's like balancing on something on the water, and he's like just looking for a house. It's kind of amusing and cute, and it's not really emphasized in the original work that everyone's going really to Christopher Robin, but it is in the original work emphasized that Christopher Robin does sort of have a little bit of a high ground in that he could can help people go to a safe place. But basically in the Disney work, Pooh doesn't find the message. Pooh just ends up floating downstream in his honey pot, and then he ends up where Christopher Robin is. But Roo finds Piglet's message and hands it to Christopher Robin. He reads it, and then tells Al to tell Piglet that they'll help. And I've always found a problem with the original work as well as in the Disney work. They do emphasize Al being sort of there, but him not really doing anything. And I thought that was just so odd, because an owl can fly. Why is he not helping, Piglet? I mean, Piglet is probably, like, practically, he probably doesn't even weigh that much. He's so teeny. Why can't Al, like, lift him up in some way, shape, or form and take him to safety? I mean, I thought that was just so odd. But it is kind of emphasized, I think, more in the Disney work, that, and as well as in the original work too, that he does babble and he doesn't really do anything. I think Al is pretty much the same character, that wise person who likes to talk all of these different stories and doesn't really focus on what's really going on here and now. But I just thought that was just always a little odd. But basically, Piglet ends up going and floating down under in a chair in the Disney work, and then they go down this kind of like waterfall almost, and Pooh actually ends up on Piglet's chair, and then Piglet ends up in Pooh's jar of honey. And then basically Pooh lands safely where Christopher Robin is, and so does Piglet. And then for some reason Christopher Robin is like, "You did a brave thing, Pooh," even though really Pooh didn't really do anything that much. And he sort of declares him as a hero, and he and all his friends celebrate. And then Eeyore actually ends up finding a house for Al, but this house actually is Piglet's house. And I guess Piglet feels awkward in, like, not saying to Al that he can't live in his house, so he kind of gives up his house. And then Pooh says that, "Oh, you can live with me, Piglet, that's not a problem." It's sort of put in as that they're both heroes now. Piglet and Pooh are both heroes now because they sacrificed something. Even though I don't think Pooh really did much. I mean, he just ended up being on the safe side of shore and happened to have a honey pot that I guess was convenient for Piglet. But that's really how the second one ends, or the second segment of the Disney version ends. But we'll see how I mentioned in the original work that none of this, like, housing stuff or any of this hero worship or praising happens. All that really happens is that Piglet is saved. The end. Doesn't go on any further than that. But that's, I think, really all I can say about the next one. Now, this is the last story, Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2. And this is based on the 4th and 7th chapters of The House at Pooh's Corner. Now, in the Disney work, these chapters are backwards, actually. Again, as we've seen through Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day, the chapters are kind of all mishmashed in the Disney version. So I'll kind of explain what happens with both original works and then kind of explain how they coincide with the Disney work. But again, I'm probably explaining these out of order because, again, Disney likes to switch them around on me and make it more complicated. But basically, in the original work of Chapter 4, Pooh starts debating who he should see today. He finally decides to go to Piglet's, and he sees Piglet digging a hole where Piglet wishes to plant an acorn to grow to a tree. Meanwhile, Tigger and Roo go out to play for a play date. Roo asks Tigger if he can climb like Pooh, and he does. And Pooh and Piglet stroll along and find Tigger and Roo in the tree. Pooh and Piglet try to think of a way to get them down, because once Tigger goes up into the tree, and again, Tigger thinks that he is the high and mighty king and he can do it. Once he goes up in the tree and starts climbing, he realizes, oh, it's too high. I'm scared now. I don't know what to do. As Pooh and Piglet are trying to figure a way to get him down, Christopher, Robin, and Eeyore show up. And Christopher suggests that they use his tunic, and Tigger and Pooh then Tigger and Roo can land into it. And they do, with Eeyore being somewhat hurt in the process by Tigger's jump. It sort of emphasized how Roo lands safely in the tunic as he's jumping off the tree. But then once Tigger goes, everybody just gets hurt. And Tigger is somewhat ends up being on top of Eeyore somehow. And that's kind of how the 4th chapter kind of ends itself in the original work. And then in the 7th chapter, Tigger, it's emphasized that Tigger's bounce is getting on Rabbit's nerves. So they, being Piglet, Pooh, and Rabbit, try to lose him as they go for a walk in the misty woods. Tigger manages to find his way back and tells Christopher, Robin, and they both go out searching for them, meaning Pooh, Piglet, and Rabbit, because it actually ends up that Pooh, Piglet, and Rabbit get lost. And then Christopher finds Pooh and Piglet, and then Tigger finds Rabbit, and Tigger bounces with a great bounce when he sees Rabbit. And because he's done something even more grander than before in the fact that he was able to find somebody, and ironically do the thing that Rabbit doesn't really necessarily find so fond of Tigger. So that's kind of how the original work really plays itself out. In the Disney work, somewhat different. Again, we're going backwards here with Tigger's bounce story to be the first story. And again, in the Disney version, it's trying to connect those things together to make one story. So in the Disney version, it's pretty much the same up until the point until Pooh and Piglet split from Rabbit and run into Tigger. And then Tigger finds Rabbit and takes him home. So basically, it's emphasized that Tigger is the one that ends up finding everybody and taking them home, instead of having Christopher Robin, I guess, really come into the picture. And you'll kind of see how in certain scenes it's emphasized how Rabbit does not like Tigger bouncing, again with him coming into his garden, and you'll kind of see that happen. And in the original work, it doesn't seem like it tries to offer that much of an explanation. But in the Disney work, I think there is this explanation that's put out there to explain at Rabbit's sort of, I guess, irritation. But in the other story, Tigger bounces with Roo up into the tree instead of climbing like in the original work. And then Christopher Robin, Rabbit, and Kangaroo arrive, and then they use Chris's coat as a net. Roo makes it safely down, but Tigger still is too scared to jump. The narrator helps Tigger down by tilting the book. Then tilting the book, so you'll see how the narrator kind of tilts the book so Tigger can kind of work his way down. Which is kind of interesting how Disney decided to play it out that way instead of Tigger just actually jumping, unlike in the original work where he actually jumps. And it's also emphasized in the Disney work how Rabbit says, if you come down, you gotta promise that you won't bounce anymore. And as Tigger comes down, Rabbit clearly tries to emphasize this point. Like, he says, hey, you can't bounce. You know, you can't have, like, a victory lap here. And then Tigger kind of gets depressed and is like, why can't I jump? Oh, I can't jump anymore? That's sad. And then Rabbit kind of caves in and says, oh, fine, you know, you can jump. And then everybody starts jumping at the end, and then even Rabbit starts to jump. And then it's kind of emphasized with the idea of, you know, even if some things that maybe some people do that you don't like, you may actually find yourself enjoying if you maybe try it out once. And this is the first time the rabbit tries it out. And basically everybody jumps and they live all happily ever after. That's basically how the Disney version ends itself. So from what I've explained, pretty much a lot of the characters are the same in their personality for the most part. I thought it was interesting how Disney decided to add that gopher. I have not seen that gopher character in any of the A.A. Milne's works. Haven't seen that character come up. And I think for the most part everybody else is there. And I think they use similar terminology, like with the 100-Acre Wood. You know, Christopher Robin says silly old bear on occasion. You'll kind of see how sometimes Disney pulls a lot that's fairly similar. But there's also things that are fairly different from what I've explained, and how some things are a little bit out of order. Again, like the Disney work kind of going backwards and deciding to put the 7th chapter first instead of the 4th chapter first. And trying to switch a couple of things around in order to make it maybe more comedical or make it more engaging to watch. But there are also times where the original work as well can be entertaining and can be engaging as well. And I can find fairly cute and imaginative. But for the most part, I think the imagination and sort of the innocence shines through in the Disney work as well as in the original work as well. I think this is fairly similar, I think, to the idea of Peter Pan, except maybe not such a more complex world. I think this is a very simplified, childlike world, in that there's not really a whole lot of elements to it, in that it's just these woods with these like these very important like characters that really influence how this world is how this world kind of functions within Christopher Robin's you know, childhood days. Like, I think it's really designed to be sort of Christopher Robin's like imagination. I'm sure there's there's other interpretations you can put them in as to what Winnie the Pooh and his characters are, but I think they're just sort of his figments of imagination, and how they sort of come to life through sort of his childhood playing. Because it is emphasized both in the Disney work as well as in the original work that Christopher Robin is sort of this character who really helps out and is kind of like an instigator and does a lot of stuff. When something goes wrong, he's there to fix something. And I think that's what kids do a lot of when they play. They try to pretend to be kind of like the hero who helps this world kind of function and repair itself. I think that's really how it works for the most part. But I think that's really all I can say about them. I apologize if it was a little bit confusing, but if there's any questions that come up, any comments or concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But I think that's all I can really say about it. I apologize if it goes a little bit long, but there was a lot to explain here, and I felt like I should explain it. But I think that's really all I can say. Again, questions, comments, concerns, I'm more than happy to answer them. And until next time.